The morning I ended my marriage, Bing Crosby was playing in the kitchen and the house smelled like cinnamon rolls. It was Christmas morning 2023. 6:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 5, sitting at the edge of our bed in the dark, listening to Marcus sleep the way only a guiltless man sleeps, deep, slow, completely unbothered. I got up, put on my robe, walked downstairs, and that's when I saw it. The fireplace had 4 stockings above it. Point forward. We don't have children. We don't have pets. We had 2 stockings. Mine, dusty rose with my name embroidered in gold thread, a gift from my mother the first Christmas Marcus and I were married. His forest green, slightly too big, hanging beside mine for 6 years. I knew every ornament on that mantel. I knew the exact crack in the 3rd brick from the left. I knew this fireplace the way you know a place you've lived in long enough to stop seeing it. But that morning I saw it. Red velvet. White trim. Hung exactly 1 hook to the right of mine like it had always belonged there. No name on it. It didn't need one. I stood there for probably 45 seconds. I didn't cry. I didn't call his name. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a coffee, and stood at the window watching the backyard go gray-blue in the early light. And I thought very clearly, the way you think when something finally stops surprising you. So that's where we are. That I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of the story. This is not a story about jealousy. I am not the woman who screams, throws plates, calls his mother at midnight. I have never been that woman. What I am, what I have always been, is a woman who watches carefully, thinks slowly, and acts only once. Only when I'm certain. Only when I'm ready. Why Christmas morning I was ready. What I didn't know yet was that I was also richer than I thought, and Marcus was significantly more exposed than he knew. But we'll get there. My name is Renee. I'm 38 years old. I am a senior financial compliance analyst for a regional banking group headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have spent the last 11 years of my career doing one thing exceptionally well: finding what people try to hide in numbers. I find the transfer that doesn't match the date. The account that appears once and never again. The signature that's off by a fraction of a degree. I build audit trails the way other people build arguments, methodically, patiently, brick by brick, until the picture is so complete and so airtight that there is no version of the conversation where the other party walks away clean. I am, professionally speaking, the last person you want reading your financials when you have something to hide. Marcus knew what I did for a living. He just never applied that information to himself. We met at a work conference in Atlanta in the spring of 2017. He was charming in that easy, unhurried way. The kind of man who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room without appearing to try. He was a regional sales director for a logistics company. Good salary. Nice car. Presentable family. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, bought the house in Steel Creek. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, $387,000 with me as the primary borrower on the mortgage because Marcus had a collections account from 2014 that hadn't fully aged off his credit report yet. He paid half the down payment in cash. I handled the paperwork as I always did, because paperwork is my native language. We were married in October 2019, 43 guests, outdoor ceremony, no drama. The marriage was not perfect. I want to be honest about that because I'm not interested in telling you a story where I was flawless and he was a cartoon villain. We had years that were genuinely good. We had patterns that weren't. He traveled often for work, 3, sometimes 4 days a week. I worked long hours. We functioned more like well-organized roommates than lovers for stretches of time. And I told myself that was normal, that every long marriage had its rhythms, its quiet seasons. I noticed things though. I always notice things. The new password on his personal phone in June changed without mention, which had never happened before. The way he started leaving the room to take certain calls. A name that appeared once in a text notification I wasn't meant to see. Sarah, just checking you got home safe. I asked about it casually, the way I ask about most things, and he said she was an old friend from college, someone going through a divorce. He'd been a listening ear. He nodded. Filed it. What I filed it under was Not enough. Not yet. November gave me enough. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the most competent person in a marriage. I managed our household finances. Both of them, personal and joint. I tracked the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance renewals, the quarterly tax estimates. Marcus was always almost late on. I remembered the car service appointments. I renewed the subscriptions. I noticed when the grocery spend crept up and when it didn't. This was not something Marcus asked me to do. It was something I simply did because I was better at it, because disorder makes me physically uncomfortable, and because, I can see this clearly now, it gave me a sense of control in a space where I was slowly losing it in other ways. Marcus was not a bad man in the dramatic sense. He was something almost harder to name. He was a man who had learned that if he simply didn't engage with the uncomfortable thing, I would eventually manage it. Conflict made him disappear into pleasantness. He would smile, deflect, squeeze my hand, change the subject, and somehow I would find myself 3 sentences later discussing dinner instead of the thing I'd originally raised. He was extraordinarily good at that. Took me years to understand that it was a skill, not a personality trait. There were 3 moments before November that I should have treated as the end. The first was March 2022. I found a charge on our joint visa, $340 at a restaurant downtown called Vesper, on a Tuesday night when Marcus had told me he was in Raleigh for a client dinner. I checked his calendar. The Raleigh trip was real. It ended Wednesday morning. But $340 at Vesper on Tuesday put him 45 minutes from Raleigh. Not in it. When I asked, gently, he said he'd wrapped early and driven back, wanted to surprise me, ended up getting dinner alone because I'd already eaten. I looked at the receipt later. The itemized version which I pulled from the app. 2 entrees. A bottle of Barolo. Dessert for 2. I said nothing. I saved the screenshot. The second was August 2023. We were at his colleague's wedding. Outdoor venue, late summer heat. The kind of event where everyone gets a little too warm and a little too honest. His co-worker Devon pulled me aside near the bar, a little looser than he intended to be, and said, "Marcus told us you two were having problems. We didn't know it was that serious." I smiled and said, "Oh, you know Marcus, he's always being dramatic." Devon laughed, relieved to have misread the room, and walked away. I stood at that bar for a long moment, holding a glass of Riesling I no longer wanted, doing the math on what version of our marriage Marcus had been describing to his colleagues. I said nothing. I remembered everything. The third moment was the one that changed the temperature permanently. It was the first weekend of November 2023. Marcus sat me down on the living room couch. Our couch, the gray sectional I'd spent 3 weeks selecting, with that particular gentle, careful energy he deployed when he needed me to absorb something without reacting to it. He laced his fingers together. He looked at me with what I can only describe as practiced tenderness. "Babe," he said, "I wanted to talk to you about Christmas." He told me that Sarah, the old friend, the one going through a divorce, the one who'd texted to check if he got home safe, had no family nearby for the holidays. That she'd be alone. That it didn't feel right knowing that, doing nothing. He said, "I think we should invite her to Christmas dinner. It's just one meal. It's the right thing to do." He watched my face the entire time he said it. Carefully. The way you watch a door to see if it's going to hold. I looked at him for a moment. Then I smiled, and I mean I really smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes, because I have excellent control over my face, and I said, "That's so thoughtful of you." He exhaled, visibly, and I went to the bedroom, closed the door quietly, and called a woman named Diane. Diane went to Yale Law School, clerked for a federal judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina, and has been doing divorce and financial litigation for 14 years. She does not do holiday discounts. Her consultation fee is $400 an hour, and she is worth every dollar. I had 3 consultations with her before Marcus finished his Christmas shopping. What she found in our financials, what I helped her find, Made the stocking above the fireplace look like the smallest problem in the room. Let me tell you what the weeks between that November conversation and Christmas actually looked like from the outside. From the outside, they looked completely normal. I made dinner 4 nights a week. I attended his company holiday party in a burgundy dress and laughed at the right moments and shook the right hands. I wrapped presents. I ordered the good coffee beans we always used for Christmas morning. I confirmed the grocery order for the holiday meal. A standing rib roast, roasted potatoes, haricots verts, the good rolls from the bakery on Providence Road. And I want you to appreciate this, I even asked Marcus what Sarah's dietary restrictions were so I could plan accordingly. He looked at me like I'd handed him a gift. "She doesn't eat shellfish," he said. "That's really thoughtful of you, babe." "Of course," I said. What he did not know was that while he was buying Sarah a Christmas gift, a silk scarf $178, from a boutique in Dilworth, charged to a personal card I wasn't supposed to be monitoring but technically had access to under our shared account dashboard, I was sitting across from Diane in her office on South Tryon Street for the second time in 2 weeks, going through 11 months of bank statements with a yellow legal pad and a very specific kind of focus I usually reserve for professional audits. I need to back up slightly because the gift matters 2 weeks before Christmas. I found the receipt in the inside pocket of his wool overcoat. I wasn't searching his coat. I was hanging it up, which I had done for 6 years, because Marcus treated the coat rack like a suggestion. The receipt was folded in thirds, from a boutique called Maison Darling, $178.43, one item, gift wrapped, paid in cash. Marcus never paid cash for anything. We were a points household. Every purchase went on the card. The fact that he'd walked into a store and paid cash for a wrapped gift meant exactly one thing. He knew it couldn't appear anywhere I might see it. I photographed the receipt with my phone, put it back exactly as I'd found it, and hung up the coat. That evening at dinner he told me he'd found a perfect gift for his mother. I nodded and passed him the bread. But it was the night of December 9th that I remember most precisely. We'd gone to bed, Marcus fell asleep quickly. That deep, unbothered sleep I mentioned. And at some point around 2 in the morning his phone lit up on the nightstand with a notification. I wasn't trying to read it. The screen simply lit the ceiling the way phones do, and I caught 3 words in the preview before it dimmed. "Can't wait to." From Sarah. 2:04 in the morning. I lay there in the dark for a long time. I didn't touch his phone. I didn't wake him. I stared at the ceiling of the bedroom we'd shared for 6 years and I thought, with absolute clarity, the problem is not Sarah. Sarah is a symptom. The problem is what I've been allowing to go unexamined for longer than I want to admit. The next morning I called Diane for our 3rd consultation. I told her I was ready to move. She said, "Good. Because I found something in the financials you need to see." That was the moment everything shifted. I had given Diane access to everything. Not because she asked for everything, she asked for the standard documents. Tax returns, mortgage statement, joint account history, any investment accounts, retirement balances. Baseline. What I gave her was considerably more than the baseline because when you spend 11 years building audit trails professionally, you don't know how to do anything halfway. I gave her 38 months of joint account statements. I gave her the home equity line documentation. I gave her Marcus's credit pull from when we bought the house, annotated with my own notes. I gave her a folder I had been quietly building since August. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just a record. Dates, amounts, receipts, screenshots. The kind of documentation that doesn't feel like anything in the moment and feels like everything in a lawyer's office. Diane called me on a Tuesday morning, December 12th. I was at my desk at work. She said, "Can you talk?" And something in her voice made me pick up my coat and walk to the stairwell. She'd found $31,000. More precisely, she'd found $31,000 missing. Transferred out of our joint savings account over the course of 14 months, August 2022 through September 2023, in increments designed to stay under the threshold that triggers automatic bank review. Never more than $2,400 at a time. Sometimes as low as $800. Consistent enough to be deliberate. Spaced enough to appear routine. The destination account was not one I recognized. It was not a vendor. It was not a utility or a subscription or a family member. It was a personal account. And when Diane's investigative contact ran the routing number, it traced to a checking account opened in March 2022. 1 month after the dinner receipt at Vesper. He financed her apartment, Diane said. I stood in that stairwell and I felt something I can only describe as the opposite of surprise. It wasn't shock. It was the specific sensation of a suspicion you've been carrying for a long time finally being confirmed in writing. The strange, cold relief of being right about the thing you hoped you were wrong about. I asked Diane what our options were. She said, several. Because here is what else was true. The house, the 4-bedroom in Steel Creek, $387,000, purchased in 2019, was mortgaged with me as the sole primary borrower. Marcus was listed as a co-borrower for asset purposes only, a distinction that mattered significantly in what Diane described as a contribution-weighted, equitable distribution scenario. We were in North Carolina, not a community property state, which meant the court looked at who paid what, who borrowed what, and whose name carried the primary legal weight. My name carried it. Additionally, the transfers from our joint account, made without my knowledge or documented consent, were potentially actionable under North Carolina's financial misconduct statutes as they pertained to marital assets. Diane used the phrase, dissipation of marital assets. She said it the way you say something you've said many times before matter-of-factly, but she watched my face when she said it to make sure I understood the weight of it. I understood the weight of it. What do you need from me? Yes. More time, she said. And your patience. I had both. Here is something I have learned, both professionally and now personally. The most powerful thing you can do when you know something the other party doesn't know you know is nothing. Nothing visible anyway. From December 12th through December 25th, I was the most pleasant version of myself. I was warm at dinner. I was engaged in conversation. I asked Marcus about his work, his travel, the colleague who was having the new baby. I bought him a cashmere sweater for Christmas. Charcoal gray, $210 from Nordstrom, because I had already decided that I was not going to be the woman who fell apart at the finish line. I had a plan. The plan required me to be exactly who I had always appeared to be for 13 more days. Meanwhile, I was moving with considerable precision underneath the surface of that pleasantness. December 13th. I opened a solo personal checking account at a different bank than our joint accounts. I transferred my direct deposit. I moved 3 months of personal expense coverage into it. Quietly, incrementally, in amounts that were entirely within my legal right as an account co-holder making routine personal transfers. Diane had confirmed the amounts and the method. Everything I moved was mine, categorically. My salary deposits, my personal savings contributions. Nothing joint. I was not going to give anyone a counter-narrative. December 15th. I filed a formal inquiry with our bank's internal fraud and account review division regarding the unauthorized transfers. I did not call it fraud in the initial filing. I called it a discrepancy review request, and attached 38 months of statements with the relevant transfers highlighted in yellow. The bank assigned a case number. Sir, 2023-11847. I wrote the number down in my legal pad and underlined it. December 17th. Diane filed the preliminary separation agreement with the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. It was not yet served. It was simply filed, dated, and waiting, the legal equivalent of a loaded document sitting in a drawer, entirely real, entirely binding the moment it was handed to someone. December 19th. I called the bank holding our home equity line of credit and confirmed, for my own records, that as primary borrower I had the unilateral right to freeze draw activity on the line pending a formal review. I did not freeze it that day. I simply confirmed that I could. That I had the access. That the key, so to speak, was in my hand. December 21st. Marcus came home with a second wrapped gift. Small box tucked under his arm, which he took directly upstairs. I was in the kitchen when I heard him moving around in the closet of the guest room, which he had apparently forgotten I reorganized in October and therefore knew the exact configuration of. I noted it. I said nothing. December 23rd. I called my mother and told her quietly that Christmas might be a little different this year. She asked if I was okay. I said I was better than okay. She said, "You sound like your father when he's already made a decision." My father was an accountant for 31 years. I took it as the highest possible compliment. December 24th. I made the standing rib roast from scratch. 4-bone, dry brine for 48 hours, roasted at 225 degrees until the internal temp hit 128, then seared. I made the potatoes. I made the haricots verts. I set a beautiful table. I put out the good linens. I opened a bottle of Barolo. Not the same Barolo from Vesper, but a better one. I lit the candles. I made the house look exactly the way it looked in the best years of our marriage. Then I went to the kitchen table, cleared a small space beside the breadbasket, and set down a cream-colored folder, edges squared. Christmas morning I was up at 5 again. I sat at the edge of the bed. I listened to Marcus sleep. Then I went downstairs, made the coffee, looked at the 4 stockings above the fireplace for what I already knew would be the last time, and I waited. Sarah arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She was pretty, which I had expected. She was nervous, which I had not, or rather, which told me more than she intended. She carried a lattice-top apple pie in a glass dish with both hands, the way you carry something when you're trying very hard to make a good impression. She smiled at me with a specific smile of a woman who is hoping to be forgiven for something she has technically never been caught doing. I smiled back, warmly, generously, because I could afford to. Marcus was relaxed. He poured wine. He told a story about a bad flight he'd taken in October. He touched the small of my back twice, the way he did at parties when he wanted us to appear unified. Sarah laughed a little too readily at everything he said. I served the roast. I asked Sarah appropriate questions about her work, her neighborhood, her plans for New Year's. At 3:58 p.m. the doorbell rang. Marcus looked at me. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. I said. "Would you mind getting that?" He opened the door to Diane. Gray blazer, leather portfolio, the particular expression of a woman who has delivered bad news so many times that it has become entirely neutral on her face. She introduced herself by full name and firm. She handed Marcus a legal-sized envelope, cream-colored, just like the folder on the table. She said, "You've been served, Mr. Calloway. You don't need to sign anything today." Then she looked past him at me, gave a single nod, and left. Marcus stood in the open doorway for what felt like a very long time. The Barolo was still on the table. The candles were still lit. Sarah was sitting very still in her chair, pie untouched in front of her. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and said, "The roast is going to get cold. I want to tell you what the fallout looked like practically, because I think the practical details matter. They always do." Marcus did not make a scene at the dinner table. That surprised me slightly. I had prepared for the possibility, but I think the presence of Sarah, the very woman he'd been performing normalcy for, made him self-conscious about the kind of man he was willing to appear to be in front of her. He excused himself from the table, went to the kitchen, and I could hear him on the phone, voice low and tight, and I knew he was calling his brother, who was not a lawyer and could not help him. Sarah left 40 minutes after Diane arrived. She carried her pie dish out the same way she'd carried it in, with both hands carefully, but this time the careful part had nothing to do with the pie. She said goodbye to me at the door. We looked at each other for a moment, and I think we both understood that there was nothing useful to say, so neither of us said anything. She walked to her car, closed the door. I ate a second slice of roast and finished the Barolo. Here is what happened over the following weeks. The bank's Fraud and Account Review Division completed their preliminary investigation on January 9. The $31,000 in transfers was flagged as unauthorized disbursements from a jointly held marital account, made without the documented consent of the co-account holder me. The bank initiated a recovery process. Marcus, when contacted by the bank's legal compliance team, could not produce authorization documentation because there wasn't any. The funds were not immediately returned in full. These things take time, and Diane was clear with me about that. But they were formally designated as disputed marital assets subject to recovery, which meant they were now part of the equitable distribution proceeding and could not be claimed, spent, or hidden further. The home equity line of credit was frozen on January 11, pending resolution of the separation proceedings. Marcus had apparently intended to draw from it. Diane's contact at the courthouse confirmed he'd consulted a solo practice attorney who had advised him to liquidate marital assets before the proceedings formalized, which is precisely the kind of advice that looks catastrophically bad in front of a judge and which Diane noted in the case file with what I can only describe as quiet satisfaction. The separation agreement, under North Carolina's equitable distribution framework, reflected the following. I was awarded primary residential rights to the Steel Creek property, given my status as sole primary borrower and my documented financial contributions to the household over 6 years. Marcus was given 30 days to vacate. He contested this initially through his attorney, and the judge reviewed the contribution documentation I had prepared. 38 months of bank statements, mortgage records, household expense tracking, all of it organized in the same format I use for professional audits, and ruled in my favor within 2 weeks. He was out by February 3rd. The $178 silk scarf was never mentioned in court, because it didn't need to be. Sarah, from what I understand, and I made very little effort to understand, moved back to her home state sometime in January. The apartment Marcus had been quietly funding was hers only as long as the transfers continued. When they stopped, the math changed. I don't take satisfaction in that exactly. I take satisfaction in the fact that none of it was my problem. By the first week of February, I was sitting alone in the living room of my house. My house, which I had bought, which I had mortgaged under my name, which I had maintained and organized and made beautiful for 6 years, with a fire going and a glass of something good and the specific full-body quiet of a space that finally feels exactly the right size. I took down 3 of the 4 stockings from the mantel. Kept mine. The dusty rose one with my name in gold thread. A gift from my mother. The first Christmas Marcus and I were married. I hung it back up. Just mine. Just the one. And I thought, not triumphantly, not bitterly, but with the clean, level clarity of a woman who has finally stopped managing a situation and started managing her own life, I should have done this sooner. But I did it right. And that's enough. People ask me, when I tell pieces of this story in the way you tell pieces of things, they ask me if I'm angry. And I have to think about that honestly because I want to give an honest answer. Not the clean answer. Not the healed and whole answer that makes for a tidy ending. The truth is, I was angry for about 11 days. Somewhere between December 12th, when Diane called me in that stairwell, and December 23rd, when I made the rib roast. I was angry in the way you're angry when you realize the math you've been doing was always correct, and the only reason you doubted it was because someone who benefited from your doubt was standing close enough to whisper. That's a specific kind of anger. It's not loud. It's cold and it's clarifying, and if you're disciplined enough, it's useful. After December 23rd, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just decided. There's a version of this story where I confront Marcus at the kitchen table in November, and we have a long, painful conversation and he apologizes and we go to counseling and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. I've thought about that version. I understand why some people would choose it. But I know myself. I know what I had already seen and set aside and explained away and filed under not yet. I know how many times I had extended a grace I never received in return. And I think the most honest thing I can tell you is this. Some situations are not communication problems. Some situations are clarity problems. And once you have the clarity, Real clarity, document level, Diane confirmed, case number assigned clarity. You don't owe anyone a conversation about it. You owe yourself a decision. Made mine. The house still smells like cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning because I still make them. The fireplace has one stocking above it. The Barolo is still good. The table is still set with the good linens when the occasion deserves it. The difference is that now, every single thing in that house, every object, every account, every quiet Saturday morning, belongs entirely, cleanly, and legally to me. And that feeling, that's not revenge. That's just what peace feels like when you finally stop splitting it with someone who never deserved half. If you've listened this far, I think you already know why. Maybe you've been the manager of a situation that was never yours to manage alone. Maybe you've smiled at something that deserved a lawyer. Maybe you've filed things under not yet for so long that the folder is getting heavy. It was you. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not advice because you didn't ask for mine, but an observation from a woman who spent 6 years being competent in service of the wrong thing. The skills you've been using to hold everything together. They work just as well when you're building something for yourself. You already have everything you need. You just have to decide who it's for. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I read every single one. And if you've ever smiled at something that deserved a much more strategic response, you're in the right place. Subscribe. There's more where this came from.